Multiple sclerosis affects patients of all different nationalities and cultural backgrounds. Sometimes these differences make it harder for them to understand and have different relationships with their physician. Dr. Flavia Nelson will explain how sometimes adjustments need to be made in the physician and other healthcare provider interactions with these patients in order to maximize their potential for understanding the disease and participating in their care.
Hello, I'm Dr. Flavia Nelson, and I'm a multiple sclerosis specialist. I work at the University of Texas in Houston at the MS Research Group. Today, I want to talk to you about barriers, cultural, socioeconomic barriers to good outcomes in multiple sclerosis. You know, I became a multiple sclerosis expert because I felt inspired by the patients. I admire MS patients because they want to learn everything they can and understand their disease. But one of the things I've learned from working with MS patients over the last 11 years is that sometimes culture and race and sometimes even socioeconomic issues can interfere with their ability to understand the disease and do what's best. So I feel like some of the things that we can do to help patients not only understand their disease, but also have better outcomes is understand where they're coming from. For example, in the Hispanic culture, they see the physician as almost a priest, someone that they respect so much that they may not feel that they can ask a question. So it's very important for me to say, are you understanding what I'm saying? Can you explain it back to me? Do you have any questions? Something that I see often is they don't understand, and this goes for every patient in all cultures and all backgrounds, they don't really understand that although they may feel better and they may feel back to normal, they need to continue to take the disease-modifying therapy for life. A lot of times they feel that once they feel back to normal, they no longer need the medicine. So it is important to spend time with each and every patient, making sure that they understand what this disease is doing to their brain, to their spinal cord, but also that even though they may feel normal, they may feel like everything is fine, the disease can continue to do damage if they don't keep taking their medication. They also need to understand how important this is. So how do we break these barriers that can interfere with outcomes? Spending time with the patient. For example, I often hear patients tell me, you know, no one ever explained to me what this disease is all about, or no one has ever sat with me and showed me my MRI. I know it's difficult for physicians to spend a lot of time with a patient, especially in these days when everything is so controlled by the system that you work for. But remember that this disease is complicated, and the better a patient understands it, the better they're going to be able to deal with it. So what I sometimes do is explain it this way. Your immune system and your brain are engaged in a battle, and your immune system is going to attack your brain, but not all at once, in different areas that are going to be the battlefields. Okay? Those battles can happen at different times. During the battle, brain cells can die. And at the end of the battle, which can last maybe 2 weeks, maybe 6 weeks, you're going to have some casualties. And the casualties represent a scar in your brain. And then I show them the MRI. Do you see these scars? This is an old battlefield, and depending on how big the scar is, that's how many cells or how many casualties you had. What we're trying to do by giving you medication to prevent these battles, that's one thing, but we also give you medication to stop the battle. So it's very important that, number one, you take medication to prevent the battles, but you also report symptoms as soon as possible so that if you have a battle that is causing you to have neurological symptoms, we can give you a different type of medication called steroids that will stop the battle. And if we can stop the battle early, then there will be less casualties. Does that make sense? Patients often look at me like, it never made sense before, but it does now. So then I tell them, so how would you know if you're having symptoms? How would you know if you have an attack? Can you explain to me what an attack is? And the answer is, well, I'm not sure. So that's another issue. It happens in all cultures. Some patients think every symptom is an attack or an exacerbation. Some patients think, these symptoms will go away. So we have both ends of the spectrum. The patients that call about every symptom wondering if they're having an attack, and the patients that never call because they think everything is going to be better. It's not, neither poles are good. We need to come to the middle and try to understand what is a true attack. So in order to help patients with that, I created an app called the Multiple Sclerosis Attack App. What this does is to help patients understand if a symptom may be the beginning of an exacerbation, or it may just be a fluctuation of the disease. What do I mean by that? Patients with MS may have a flare-up of their symptoms for different reasons, such as they have a cold, or they've been exercising for an hour and they're very hot, or they're extremely tired because they worked too hard or they overdid it. All of those things may bring up symptoms, and it may scare them. They may think they're having an exacerbation. But it may be a false exacerbation, or also called a pseudo-exacerbation. So how can we tell the difference? It's in the app, but what I tell patients is, if you develop symptoms, okay, either during a cold or after being hot, and the next day you're fine, you're back to normal, chances are that's not a true exacerbation. But if you develop symptoms and they keep getting worse, next day they're still there, second day they're still there, then it's most likely an exacerbation. What the app does is guide you through that line of questioning to see if you can understand whether symptoms are getting worse gradually or perhaps they're getting better every morning. I think that helps. I think it's very difficult sometimes, especially for a new patient, to understand what an exacerbation is and that they have to report it as soon as possible. So, are we ready to stop new battles? Another thing that I think it's important to remember is the emotional aspect of this disease. Often we are very good about taking care of every symptom. How's your fatigue? How is your bladder? How are your bladder issues? How is your weakness, etc.? And we prescribe medication. Here's medication for spasticity. And there are a lot of things that we need to worry about. But sometimes we seem to forget that it can be very difficult emotionally. And sometimes we don't have time to ask about, how do you feel? So one of the things that I make a point of doing, especially maybe not the first visit after diagnosis, but second or third, is how are you handling this? How is this affecting your life? And the bottom line is the first year is always very difficult for everyone, no matter how they cope. So we need to talk about coping mechanisms. One of the things that I always mention is this is a good time not only to become healthier physically, but also to work on becoming healthier emotionally. Why? Because the better you're at, or the better place that you're at in terms of being able to handle this disease, the better outcome you're going to have. So sometimes it's difficult to communicate depending on, like I mentioned before, cultural issues or race, because some people don't talk about their feelings. Some people don't like to share those things. But I've learned that no matter what culture you're from, or what ethnicity, or what race, ultimately everyone is having difficulty dealing with this disease. And ultimately, the place to open up and share that you're having that difficulty is with your physician. Why? Because fear can be paralyzing. And fear sometimes is difficult to share with family. They don't want to disappoint their family. They don't want them to be more upset. So I encourage everyone, patients and physicians, to talk about emotions, to talk about fear, and especially to help patients understand that we each have a different responsibility. Me as a physician, I have the responsibility to get the disease under control, and they should not worry about that unless they feel it's not. And they have the responsibility to take care of themselves. As I said, physically, exercising, dieting, as well as maybe counseling, maybe meditating to help control their anxiety. It doesn't matter where you're from. It is very likely that there's going to be some depression, some anxiety, and it is better to talk about it with your physician, with your family, or with a counselor. I think that being on the right medication is key. Having a good physician handling the disease is also important, but being able to cope emotionally also improves outcomes. And sometimes we leave that part of the management out because it's difficult, because it takes time. But I think it makes a difference. And I also think that connecting with your patient, connecting with the physician makes a difference. I'm originally from Mexico, and in my culture, we touch a lot and we hug a lot. Other cultures are not the same. They're not as physical, but I found that everybody likes a hug, and everybody needs a hug, especially after they've been diagnosed with MS.